Welcome back to the Expatpreneur Series, where we explore the bold moves, global dreams, and real stories of entrepreneurs building their lives and businesses abroad. I'm Kimberly Vanzi of Creative Vanzi, and I'm excited to introduce the guest for this episode 3. Today's guest is Alex Ingrim of Liberty Atlantic, a cross border financial advisory firm serving Americans living in Europe. His journey spans the US, Canada, the UK, France, Malta, and now Italy. But what makes his story extraordinary isn't just a list of countries, it's the why behind each move. Alex relocated to Italy with two toddlers, built a business from scratch during global uncertainty, and carved out one of the most specialized niches in the financial world, helping Americans navigate the overwhelming maze of cross border compliance, investments, and retirement planning. His expertise sits at the intersection of finance, international mobility, US tax complexity, and real family life abroad. And in this episode, we dive into the truth behind the paperwork, the risks, the resilience, and the real humanity behind becoming an expat entrepreneur with a family depending on you. Welcome, Alex.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. I want to start off in the beginning. I want to start off with before you moved to Italy, before you actually kind of were an expat. So, tell me a little bit about your story of how you moved across the Canada, US, UK, France, all the other countries that you were traveling around.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Alaska in the northwest of the US, and I was going to school in San Diego. I was going to college there. Like a lot of people, I studied abroad in Europe, and I met someone. So I met my future wife when I was studying abroad in France. We tried to kind of move back to the US, see if we could move back to San Diego where I was going to school. It wasn't going to work out. We weren't going to get married just to be together. So we ended up moving to Canada because we weren't going to do the long distance thing. My wife could live in Canada. I could get a student visa. So I finished my undergrad in Canada, and we knew that we always wanted to go back to Europe. So we ended up trying to figure out a way to get back to France. So I went to business school in France to try and really kind of ingratiate myself and ourselves in European life and try to have a future career in Europe. And then after that, my wife's half English, half Italian. It was just kind of a natural fit to go to London and start my career and kind of start our lives there. So we ended up in London, ended up starting a family there. And then kind of my career and I guess our lifestyle goals took us back to Europe, to Malta, and now to Italy.
Okay. I mean, so in London, you basically did establish some roots for a while there. So you became like, I guess, a permanent resident and established
Yeah.
your roots. So how did you move to Malta? I had read something, I think, when did you gave it in the report during Britex, the British changes that
Yeah,
were
so
happening.
I moved to Malta. We moved to Malta in 2015 for work. I was offered a job in Malta. So they moved us from London to Malta, which was a great timing because we had a baby and we wanted to expand our family, and London's a hard place to have multiple kids and really make a
Oh,
life. So we were living in Malta when the Brexit vote occurred, and
ah,
my wife and kids had UK passports, and that's how we were living in Europe. And really, we knew that, or had assumed that our ability to move around Europe was going to be impeded by whatever the Brexit agreement was between the UK and the rest of the EU. So we thought, we've moved around all these years. My wife being an EU citizen, me kind of being the trailing spouse that gets to follow her. And we thought, okay, what's one place that we'd be happy to raise our kids? Big country, because we're both from big countries with wide open spaces, and where's a country that has some opportunities to raise them in a different way. So Italy seemed like a natural fit. My father-in-law is from northern Italy. It was very familiar culture for my wife. Food's great, lifestyle's great. So it seemed like a really good place to then really like permanently set down roots and raise the kids.
How was it moving around with children? And we're going to get the father's perspective here. So,
Yeah, I think, I always encourage people if they're interested in like, the expat life and moving around a little bit. It feels like you have opportunity to do that until like first grade, So it was really easy and manageable when the kids were younger. It was fun to watch them pick up different cultures and different languages. Like my older son spoke Maltese when he was in preschool, which is a hard language to pick up, so it was amazing to watch. And then they picked up Italian really quickly. We moved here when they were 4 and 1. So they each picked up Italian really quickly. I think the moving was manageable. Young kids come with a lot of stuff. They come with a lot of toys. They come with a lot of accessories that you need in order to make a move successful. But we've moved like within Italy since they started going to school, and that was really hard. Like changing schools is always hard, especially when you're a family that doesn't have support or family around you or roots in a community. When you are just kind of the backstop for each other as a
mhm.
spouse or as a parent, that moving around and being unsettled for kids is really tricky. So I always encourage people like, hey, find somewhere that you like before first grade. And then once the kids understand more about being foreign, in a country or kind of there's a lot of like immigrant, parent-kid tension that goes on a lot of times too. That becomes more apparent as they get older. You can deal with that, but when they're 6, you can't deal with that.
Yeah, they don't understand, I don't think, the move as much, and it gets a
No.
little complicated. And
Yeah,
then
for
lose their
sure.
friends if they're moving around too much. So you moved around Italy though. So you where did you go? Just
So we originally settled down in Florence. Then we moved out to like the mountains around Lucca. We remodeled a house there. We moved out there. We lived there for a school year. We kind of gave that a shot because we wanted to see what life was like outside of Florence, or
mhm.
outside of a city. We settled on Florence because we knew we didn't want to live in Milan or Rome, but we knew we wanted to live in a city. And everybody has that dream of what it would be like to live in the Italian countryside. And we had a great opportunity to renovate a beautiful, beautiful house. So we took that opportunity. But I think the reality of raising kids literally in an Italian village is a lot different, even just culturally, than raising kids in an Italian city.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that because I do hear about that a lot. Like they say smaller cities, were they acceptable? Like were the cult like the residents there, they accepted you, or were they kind of a little bit
Not at
hesitant?
all. Like not even hesitant, just outright not accepting.
Okay.
It's just a misunderstanding of, like why are you here? Why do you want to live
Mhm.
here? Because there's a lot of obviously like a lot of communal like relationships. Like a lot of the people that live in these villages, they're related, they're cousins, they're related through
Mhm.
marriage. Everybody knows each other. Everybody knows everybody's personal history and backstory. And then to come in as an outsider, of course, people are going to be a little bit suspicious. But there's also like this idea, and I think it happens across Italy, where, you come in, you might have a job, like a good job, you might have money people see the projects that you're doing, the renovations that you're doing. Our village was full of, a huge renovation projects. It was an area outside of Lucca that was gentrifying very quickly. And, the common question that we always got was like, why would you want to come here? There's no opportunities here.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't even want to be here. Why do
They
you
want
want
to
to be
go to
here?
America. They're wondering why you're coming here.
Exactly. And I
And to
think most expats wouldn't understand that, right? You're like, oh, it's beautiful, and why would you want to come to where I'm from? But those people have the same idea. Like, why would you want to live here? Like, there's no money, there's no opportunities, there's no jobs. Why do you want to raise your kids here? Like, those were actual questions that were posed to us. So, you start to see a much more like 360-degree
Hmm.
picture of what life in Italy looks like when you have that experience.
So, okay, so you moved you to Luca and then you moved again, or you that's
Yeah.
where you,
We spent a school year there. It just wasn't a good fit. Just a lot of like trying to break through and establish relationships and establish friendships, and that didn't work well for the kids. It didn't work well for us. Logistically, it was super hard. Lots of driving, driving for hours a day, which we weren't used to in Florence. So we decided to move back to Florence. That's when I was starting the company as well.
Mhm.
So it was going to be impossible to try and start a company on my own in a village of 50 people. So in a big city, it was always going to be easier, have more access and more resources available. So it just worked out really well from a lifestyle perspective.
So you've mentioned the business. Talk about let's start about talk about the business at this point. Let's
Yeah.
start but backtrack. So you didn't start it till you moved the last time to Florence.
Yep.
What possessed you to go that route?
Yeah, so I mean, I think so. The business has gone through several iterations to get to where we are now at
Mhm.
Liberty Atlantic Advisors. But essentially, I quit my job in 2021 and was trying to figure out a way to serve Americans that were moving to Europe. So I'd worked in the wealth management space since the start of my career in London.
Mhm.
So at that point, over 10 years, I had been working in financial services and wealth management. And the common refrain was always like, we don't help Americans. Even firms that specialized in global mobility, working with people across different tax jurisdictions, working with, a lot of Brits moving to France or Spain or Portugal. I'd worked in firms that were the leader in that space and tried to get them to open up to Americans and work with Americans. But because of our dual tax residency, so the fact we always have to file a US tax return, our legal system, so the fact that we're always, we always have the option to sue each other. That's very different from other legal
Yes.
systems, right? It presented this business risk that most firms weren't willing to take on. So I think a lot of us that have lived abroad for 15, 20 years really felt like we had nowhere to go. Um,
Mhm.
like we had all these questions that wouldn't be answered. No one would help us. Maybe if you're super rich and had $10 million, you could go find a law firm that'll help you. But, you know,
Yeah, and you don't really know what you're getting either.
yeah. Exactly. So it felt like, there was a need in the space, and I really tried to figure out how to fulfill that. So working with a few different companies, like I said, like a few different iterations of what became Liberty Atlantic, like starting it within a department of another company and then starting our own US registered investment advisor. But it really just grew out of a need that we
Mhm.
perceived in the market. And then COVID happened and a lot of Americans started moving. So it was like right place at the right time in that regard.
Okay, so dive into exactly what you do because I don't think a lot of people understand that.
Yeah.
So,
What happens when you move abroad? You kind of have to start with the logistics of this, right? So when you move abroad, you need to immigrate. You need to be able to legally live in the country that you want to move to.
mhm,
Most visas require you or make the assumption that you need to be tax resident in that country if you want to continue to live there. So when you move to Italy, you go through the process of registering in the commune that you live in. That process, being on the anagrafe, essentially makes you tax resident in Italy.
mhm,
So now, as an American that's moved abroad, and this is very specific to Americans, you have a liability to file taxes in the US based on your US citizenship,
yep.
which is always fun. And then you have a liability to file taxes in Italy based on your residency because it's a residency-based system. Same thing in France, Portugal, and Spain, the other countries that we work
Mhm,
in. So what happens is you acquire a second tax residency. And the double taxation agreement between the US and let's use Italy as an example really mediates which country you owe your taxes to. So you don't owe taxes twice. That's a common misconception. But in this instance, you would owe the majority of your tax liability to Italy, and you'd have to play by
Hmm.
Italian rules. And to uh, most, if not all of us, that's totally foreign, right? Um, there's
Yeah, I think a lot of people do not understand that.
Yeah. And then what happens is people start to realize, oh my gosh, if I make more than 50,000 euros a year, I'm in the top marginal tax bracket. That's 43%. Whereas in the US, you'd be paying, I don't know, 12%, on the similar rate of income. Depends on if you're married, depends on a lot of things. In Italy, it doesn't depend on if you're married. It's just you personally, what do you make? There's no married filing jointly.
No.
So that creates this problem across your entire asset base, right? There's like small wealth taxes in Italy too. Capital gains taxes are really tricky in Italy. How you can use them, what you do. If you come into Italy and you're retiring and you have an IRA, guess what? On the IRA
Mhm.
distributions, you owe taxes to Italy. Guess what? On Social Security, you owe taxes to Italy, not the US. So your entire budget has to change based on your move to Italy. And sure, it's maybe it's cheaper than where you came from. That's not always a certainty either, but you need to make sure that that offsets. So we really specialize in financial planning and investment management for Americans that are moving to these four countries. We build a plan that takes into account these tax complexities, the tax impact of your move, what your new budget needs to look like, and we create a financial plan and investment management policy to deal with that and dictate that. And then we manage assets on an ongoing basis for our clients.
I'm going to bring up because there's somebody I know of that had gone through. He was born to an American, so he became automatically an American, even though he's never even touched foot in America.
Yeah,
But I think when something he had basically inherited a house, all of a sudden there was this controversy of what he had to do.
yep.
Kind of give it like a brief example of what people would have to do in that scenario, because there's a lot of people that have children here and those children will grow up and then they are like my children are half American.
Yeah. So again, same thing with my kids, right? When you are what's termed an accidental American, and I wouldn't say my kids are accidental Americans, they're intentional Americans, but when you kind of acquire US citizenship,
Mm-hmm.
you acquire the necessity to file US taxes, right? You're not liable, but you have to file. And that has implications in a variety of ways. Inheritance and estate planning don't escape that. And what often happens is that the deceased person or the settler of the estate has structured things in a way that make a lot of sense for Italy or
Mm-hmm.
France or wherever it may be, right? And in Italy, there's not a lot of estate tax implications on many things. So Italy's essentially kind of like an estate tax haven. It's a really simple regime compared to others for that. But what happens is if you are trying to make sure that you control the assets or they get directed to someone that you would really want that person to inherit that specific thing, and you
Mm-hmm.
use some kind of structuring, if you have an American beneficiary, so for example, an American child or an American niece or nephew, grandchild, that structuring has to be relevant to the person that's inheriting. So they have to report the fact that they're a beneficiary. If they
Mm-hmm.
inherit anything, they have to report the fact that they've inherited it on their US tax return to the US authorities. What you want to avoid in all tax filing situations is a surprise, right? That
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you've got €1 million that you never declared anything about to the American authorities and oh, by the way, it's in this foreign trust. Or oh, by the way, it's in this foreign life insurance policy. Or
I
something
think a
that
lot of
makes
people
tons
just
of
don't even realize
sense.
that's happened. It's like, well, for example, this person did not even realize this was happening because
Yeah.
They don't. The dual. There's the dual citizenship there, so they're kind of like, well, I've been living in Italy, so I'm Italian. So, and they
Yeah.
don't even realize. Um, so I kind of want, yeah. Well, we've got the dual citizenship. I mean, recently I read something about that there's a possibility they might eliminate that now.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is that going to kind of just briefly? How's that going to affect people?
So it's a very deeply unpopular proposal, which I don't think is even really getting much traction at this point. So I think it's very unlikely that that becomes law. The complications around it would be extreme. I mean,
Right,
it really would be because if you then have to choose one citizenship or another, or you default into losing your US citizenship, there are significant implications of that. There are tax rules about being what's called a covered expatriate. Expatriate meaning you're giving away or you're
right,
relinquishing citizenship in this context. So that if you're worth a certain amount of money, or you make a certain income, you essentially need to pay an exit tax. So that alone creates extreme complications for people that are in that situation because those people, out of their own volition, did not expatriate or relinquish their citizenship. So there are a lot of examples of where this may be unconstitutional, because people
I can
aren't
think it would leave it
intentionally
also a
giving
lot
in.
of people abandoned in a way because, for example, if someone's here, say in Italy, just use this in here in Italy, and their children are what's keeping them sort of here. So the parent, so to speak, is here in Italy and keeping there because they got divorced or whatever. If they turn around and say, "Well, you have to give up one," it's like you're basically abandoning people in a country that if you have to give up one. So, like, so for example, if the parent does not have dual, but the children have dual,
Yeah,
if the children have to give up one, and they decide, well, I want to be American or I want to be Italian. If they
yeah,
say I want to be American, that leaves the parent there going, I have no like connections, and I am got no way. I would have to like totally get a new visa, everything. It just would
yeah.
cause so much. Well, I mean, I'm hoping it. In my personal opinion, it does not go through, but it's
Yeah, no, I mean it would make I've said this before, the choices that families would have to make as a result of that, my family, your family, people in this situation are I don't think anyone appreciates what that would look like. Like to one, this is part of people's identity,
mm-hmm.
right? That they are dual citizens, especially for children, right? They're my kids would have to choose a parent. They have multiple nationalities from my wife, which is great. But they're essentially, I'm just American. I'm still just American,
Right. That's me. I'm just
but
American.
yeah, they'd have to basically, choose to relinquish what I've given them, right? As an American father with children. And so I think that, you know, on a really personal level just makes you sad. Like
Mm-hmm.
part of my identity is being American, of course. It's a huge part. And to not be able to pass that on to your kids makes you feel a little bit hollow. About, where we are as a country, that's a position that we want to take.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot going on in the world right now that's a little crazy and chaotic.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to now go more toward I guess you would say the expatpreneurs, but also even the freelancers. So let's talk about a little bit, I guess, of the tax implications for them.
Yeah.
Because it ranges depending on what you obviously make and not, but you still have to, yes, as American citizen, apply to or send your tax forms in for both. But
Yep.
there's also the self-employment tax, which
Yeah.
is a little bit on the complicated side, but not something that I can see in any form, at least on my side from researching and everything, to get rid of. It's like it seems you still got to
No.
pay it.
Yeah. 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 We can talk about that. And I mean, Italy's a very unique situation with the self-employment tax. So, self-employment tax is essentially your social security contribution, right? Which, as an employee, that's something that gets deducted from your salary and your employer pays part of it. When you're self-employed, the self-employment tax is a substitute for that. And when you live abroad, you actually have to look at the country that you're resident in and what's called
Mhm.
a totalization agreement with between the US and the country that you live in. So Italy and the US have an extremely unique one, whereby if you are a US citizen and you're self-employed in Italy, you may, depends on your situation, you may have the obligation to continue to pay the US self-employment tax rather than the Italian Social Security contribution. So
Okay,
this
that's new. That's new to
yeah,
me.
so this is a very complex piece of like the totalization agreement, right? This is like you have to go to a commercialista and a tax lawyer and talk about this. Because if you look at, I worked in the UK, I worked in Malta. In each of those countries, I was part of the social security system there. I contributed to their systems. That's what you're supposed to do. That's really straightforward. Italy is like the one unique place where you're like, hey, I really actually have to look at this. I really need to get tax advice because a lot of the other things are covered in the double taxation agreement, right?
Right.
Or they're covered in the foreign earned income exclusion or the
And those are
foreign tax
easier if
credits.
you're employed. So if you're employed, it's
Oh,
so
yeah.
easy because you get the cood and you can do that. But when you're not employed and you're self-employed, it's a little bit different.
Yeah. And so you have to be extremely aware about what your obligations are. I think this is the part of being an entrepreneur that is so hard because you have to inform yourself about what your tax
Mhm.
obligations are in your new country. And then you have to be an advocate for yourself because you don't want to be your commercialista's only American client or only expat client. And if you are, you're going to
I
have to
think I
tell them
am.
what to do. Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, I don't think she knows. She doesn't submit mine. I have to actually self-submit. And that's
Okay.
where it comes, that's why it becomes a little bit more complicated because when I don't have anything major, I don't have like a house or any other assets. So it's
Yeah.
really just my income. But when you self-submit online, and you do the online self-submit, it's also restrictive because they don't really know how to handle it either. So
Yeah.
they you can get the form that you know that you can do, but when it comes to self-employment, you're kind of stuck. It's like they
Yeah.
make you pay it.
Yeah.
And I don't like I've like looked into it and I know there's this treaty and I am paying like you pay your here because I end up paying here for
Yeah.
everything I'm doing. And you pay in November, you pay your your
Yep.
income and everything else. So I'm paying everything here and I'm going, but I'm still paying there. And I still
Yeah.
think there's something that I could stop somehow by showing I pay here or
It's called a
it's,
certificate of coverage.
but I
That's
can't
what
find that anywhere.
you have to apply to the Social Security Administration or IMSS to get your certificate of coverage. So it
But I've
depends on
asked him and they have no clue what I'm talking about.
it's
That's
easier to
why
get
it's,
it from Social Security. Like they actually know what's
oh,
going on.
okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And so that just sits in the background, essentially, from my understanding. Again, I'm not a tax lawyer; it's not my area of expertise. But that's your covering yourself proposition is having the certificate of coverage. That's what you need to prove that you're a part of one social security system or another, and you're following the law that they've negotiated between themselves. I mean, this is from the 80s, if I remember right, the treaty. So a lot of these issues that we're talking about, expat entrepreneur, remote worker, these things were like never even conceived of when they negotiated all of this.
Okay. I don't know. It gets complicated, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So you also do financial investments. So like retirement and all that. Explain a little bit more about that because even
Yeah.
just getting a bank account here can be slightly complicated for an American.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a US registered investment advisor. Like we really focus on how we can help Americans investing while they're living abroad, right? So what we're trying to really focus on is guiding people to how they should manage their investments, managing them for them, and making sure that their tax exposure is optimized. And so, what we mean by that is if you look at the range of options that you have when you move abroad, a lot of people that move to Italy, everybody's really excited. They want to invest in Italy, right? So they're like, I'm going to move all my money to euros. I'm going to invest in Italy. I'm going to go to the bank. There's a few problems that arise out of that. So, foreign mutual funds and foreign ETFs are not US tax compliant or tax efficient. They're what are referred to as passive foreign investment companies, and the reporting obligations on them are extremely onerous, and the taxation, it just penalizes you for holding these foreign assets. So, holding foreign mutual funds and ETFs, what they would recommend that you do when you go to an Italian bank, that's not tax efficient. You're going to be taxed to kingdom come by the Americans for holding those. So that's problematic in and of itself, right? Um, then if you look at, and any of us who have lived here for a while see this pretty clearly now, but when you look at the Italian financial system or the European in general, it's just not as developed as what you get back in the US. So whether that's like having credit card limits that are extremely low compared to the American system, or just I've
Yeah.
had many people tell me they can't even get credit cards, the bank won't offer them. Um, I've had, when you go and you talk to a banker, one of the big differences between the US system and the European system is a lot of American professionals are required by law to be fiduciaries. We have to act in the client's best interest. That concept doesn't really exist in Europe. So you say it's best practice, but it's been shot down many times to do away with commissions, to do away with sales promotions and things like that in the European financial system at an EU level. That's still maintained. Your banker still gets commissions for pushing products. That's just the way that the system's set up. And some banks are worse than others, but an American that doesn't know any better walking into that situation thinks that they're really dealing with someone who has their best interests in mind. And, sometimes that's just not the case. So it's a lot harder to navigate a foreign system. So we emphasize for a lot of clients and for various tax reasons as well. Like you need to keep your money in the US to remain tax compliant. There's no way to transfer an IRA or a 401k outside the US. That just is an immediate tax event, and it just creates all sorts of capital gains or income tax problems. And so basically, we're really working with people to invest their money in the US to try and optimize their taxation in both systems. And in each country, that means something totally different because in Italy, you're playing by the domestic tax rules. In France, you're actually playing more by the US tax rules because of the double taxation agreement. So you have to be really intentional about the way that you're investing and how you're investing.
Okay. Now I could be off on what I'm going to say because I don't know about investing as much. But if you're investing and you're keeping your money in the US,
Yeah,
here it seems that when you have an Italian commercialista, they want to know what it is in the US, like what you
yeah,
have sometimes. And
yeah,
I've heard it from two different commercialistas. From one that would be like, oh no, it's US and I don't touch that. And then there's others that are like, oh no, I need to know everything about you.
yeah, yeah.
Which is kind of on the legal side on this
You have to declare everything. Yeah,
to here, to
yeah,
Italy.
yeah.
Okay.
That's the way that it works. I mean, your Quadro RW, part of your Italian tax return, that is for reporting all of your foreign assets, whether it's property,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's investment accounts, whether it's bank accounts, because the really common situation that you find when you don't do that reporting, because there's this misconception out there that and I mean, it's probably true in some ways, but that the US and the Italians don't talk to each other. So that let's say that you've got like your Fidelity account that you invest in the US and you keep your money there and you're never gonna touch it or move it around. How would the Italians ever know? That's the common thing that people say. Well, what really like a very prevalent situation is okay, you found a house that you absolutely love. You really want to buy it. You don't have enough money in Italy in euros. So you're going to move some money from your Fidelity account over to your Italian bank account in order to buy the house. Well, guess what? When you move that $50,000 over, your Italian bank is going to flag it to the
Oh yeah.
Agenzia delle Entrate, and the Agenzia delle Entrate is going to audit you because they're going to say, where did that money come from? And because you've never declared it on your tax return before, they're going to then audit you and they're
Hmm.
going to try and understand where that came from. And the non-declaration penalty is really heavy. The actual tax that you pay on a lot of those foreign assets, like with property, you can offset it with your foreign property taxes. For investment accounts, it just depends on what type of account it is, but it's usually 0.2% a year. That's the equivalent tax that it would be for an Italian investment account. The difference is in Italy, it gets taken out straight away without anyone ever asking you or telling you. They're taxing you on your accounts automatically if you check that box on the account opening. So I say to people like it's not a tax on your foreign assets. It's not even necessarily a wealth tax. It's really just an equivalency tax to say, regardless of if you hold your investments outside of Italy or inside Italy, you're going to be taxed the same way. And I think
Hmm.
that's just fair. And so declaring your assets is just part of the deal when you live in a new country.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that, but I
I agree.
I definitely have to declare. Um, okay, so let's see. Is there anything else that you do that you think that maybe an expat or an entrepreneur living here and that is American that would need to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially from an entrepreneurial lens, I think the real key is understanding how all of these components mix together. So everything that we've talked about is important, but with a different emphasis, right? So
Mhm.
if you're an entrepreneur and you're running a business, understanding how Italian tax impacts you, understanding how your requirement to contribute either to the Italian or US social security system, how that impacts your retirement, how your existing retirement
That's
funds or social security
retirement is very,
benefits.
very important. It's on that.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, I'm just stop for a second here on this because
yeah,
um, that is something that's very like goes back to what I was saying before, where I was trying to figure out because I am 100% vested in the US. So I can,
yeah,
like, when I retire, I get, and there is a treaty that I do know where here, where if you're not, because I just started putting in obviously a couple
yeah,
years here. So you're not going to be anywhere near 100% vested here
yep,
until, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years from now. And depending on your age, obviously, it makes a
yeah,
difference. So there is a treaty that says that we will recognize and actually combine, but even so, I don't think I would be covered. But anyway, so there are these treaties that nobody knows about, and they really should, I agree, find out this and
yeah.
learn about it so that they can figure out where they're going to be. Because I don't even know if they think about their retirement at a certain age.
No. No, I think a lot of people at a certain age, like in their 30s or 40s, that are moving, maybe they're not vested in the US. Maybe they hadn't really even thought about it, or they hadn't entered their prime working years for their salary because your social security benefits based on how much you made, right? Not just being vested, but how much you made in
It's,
your
yeah,
career. So, not contributing during your peak earning years is going to mean that you give up something in your social security benefit. But if you're, in an Italian system during your peak earning years and you're actually earning well, that's okay. That can be fine. But if you're taking a huge, significant pay cut to move, and we see this all the time. People will say, I'm burned out in the US. I'm 40. I'm moving to Italy. I'm going to do some consulting. I'm going to make 30 grand a year and that's enough to live. And we agree, like that can be enough to live. Sure, that can be fine. Maybe supplemented by savings. But you're then no longer adding to your retirement benefit. You're no longer saving for retirement. And, I think it's a big misconception because we have this social safety net in Europe. But for some European retirees, retirement looks bleak. It's not
Hmm.
nice. It's not great. They get 800 euros a month in a pension and have to try and figure out how to live off of that because private savings isn't emphasized here. It's not taught, it's not talked about. There's no investment culture. So I think there's a lot of mismatch of
And they don't
expectations.
start because if you think about the children, they don't leave your house until a lot later.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
they're not working. And I'm one of those that started working when I was 12, like babysitting and literally
Yeah.
learning money, and like, oh, a whole week I could babysit the whole week, and like I earn close to 100 more a week at the age
Yeah.
of 12. And I literally have always started worked since then, but while I was in school and everything else. So I started early, but here they're like, including my two poor kids, that they're in schooling, so they don't work.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, so we're talking about the social security, I mean the retirement. What about, is there like I would say, what would be the lowest limit of, because you've got people who are working that are like freelancers and they really are, it's tough to,
Yeah.
between taxes that they have to pay and trying to
Yeah.
save money for even retirement. What would you say to them if,
Yeah, I would say have a plan, right? When you go into freelancing, don't think of it as a spur of the moment decision. Don't think of it as a reaction or a response to burnout or whatever is happening in your life. That is a normal reaction and response, right? Is to scale down and figure things out. But consciously try and build a plan after that. And that plan could be, hey, I'm going to move to Sicily for 5 years, and then I'm going to get back into the corporate life. It could be, I'm going to take a couple of years and do some consulting, but develop a plan. Or it could just be like, I've got a great business idea and I need to take my shot. But there needs to be a purpose and a plan behind that because you are sacrificing something in the present, in the here and now. And I think acknowledging what the pros and cons of that are over the medium to long term is really important. And, once you get to Italy, you do realize, hey, I don't need to make 250 grand a year like I did in Chicago. That's like a very normal
that would be
reaction,
really
right?
good.
Yeah. Like that would be you'd be in the top 0.001% or something here if you did that. But you still do have to have like, hey, how do I save that 500 bucks or 1,500 bucks a month for retirement? How do I buy a house here? I think
But
that's
even
like
for
a
buying a
huge,
house, right?
yeah, that's a huge question mark for a lot of people that become freelancers because it's not easy to get a mortgage here. It's not easy to get credit here. It's you start from zero. Your US credit score does not matter. So, it's intimidating. So having a plan to deal with your new reality is really important.
Yeah, I agree. What about somebody who, though, is already living here? And we'll go to the female aspect, the mom who
Yeah.
gets divorced, has already been spending most of the years of the children, like raising the children, not working, not
Yeah.
getting any income, and then gets stuck at the age of whatever, 40, 50.
Yeah.
And they're going, what am I supposed to do now? How am I going to retire, or if I can retire even later on?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of these conversations, and the conversation starts off in a very similar way to what I just described.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we try and do in that situation is work backwards. So, we say, okay, what do you want life to look like in 20 years? Or when do you want to retire? So, a common thing is in my 60s. And so we work backwards from there, and we say, what do you need to do to have your desired lifestyle in retirement? And then what asset base do you have now? Usually, during a divorce, asset base gets split. You're starting from scratch. You're trying to figure
Yeah.
out exactly what's going on, right? And so we look at what's left over and how we build a foundation. And then year by year, what you do in order to take those micro steps to achieve the big macro goals.
Hmm.
And tying in all of the things that go into that. So, childcare, career, starting a new career usually, or thinking about career differently. So we look at all those micro steps of, okay, and we try to make them achievable. And I think that's the really big aspect of this is,
Hmm.
it's not just building a new life, it's building self-esteem and confidence in the new life that you're
Independence
building.
and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it might be year one, you're starting something new. Can you make 5,000 euros year one? And if not, hey, that's okay. Year two, what can we expect? And checking in on it every year so that by year 3 to 5, we're getting close to where we want to be. Because I think the most harmful approach in this situation is really saying, hey, I'm 2 years into trying to be independent. I feel like a failure. I haven't, done like progressed in my business. I haven't progressed in my personal financial goals. And people really need to understand that that's totally okay. This stuff, like independence, looks like it happens overnight. It's an intentional 5-year process,
It
like
depends
at
where you're
least.
looking. If you look at Instagram, they'll tell you, sure, you could you could
Yeah,
make millions overnight. Just do this one
exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is not true, but
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
it is. Okay, so we've covered a good amount of stuff here today. Um, what would you say for we're going to go backwards again toward your life now, your expat life. What would you say were like the good times, as in something that would like really stand out? There's something that you remember, like this was the greatest move or the greatest time, or maybe even just creating your own business was the best time um, as an expat.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was when my kids were young. So when we had a lot of freedom, we didn't have a lot of financial security. We were just getting started, particularly when we lived in Malta. So we had a really good quality of life between, work-life balance, having young kids that took up a lot of our time, but having enough financial security that, we could go out to dinner every once in a while. That was a really great time. And I think, the key with that was it was really manageable and attuned to what we were trying to achieve at that point in life. Like Malta's a tiny island, and when you have two little kids, like two kids under two that take up a lot of your time, you're not really worried about the amenities that you're missing out on. You just want to be able to go to the park with the kids and keep
Hmm.
things simple and spend time with them. And obviously the weather is fantastic, so that helps. But I think for us, that was the most fun that we had had along the journey was just raising a few little babies and appreciating being in the moment.
And what would you say is the most trying time that you had to deal with, would you say?
Well, I think there's a lot of every time you immigrate and have to do the paperwork, that's a
Oh.
trying moment. Um, but I think probably, trying to get started in London, in your 20s, like that was really challenging. I think trying and that's really rooted in trying to get a good job without having any network, any support, any friends or family in a new big city. I'm sure a lot of people have done it domestically, moving to New York or places like that. I think that's a really intimidating moment and a really vulnerable moment in life. And that was really hard whether you're an expat or living in your own country.
Mhm. Yeah, moving anywhere is always something
Yeah.
new to change. So if you were to tell somebody, so look more on not on the business aspect, like what you do financially, but on the expatpreneur type aspect, what would you tell somebody who says, I want to start this type of business on the expatpreneur and starting a business here? What would you tell
Yeah.
them?
I would tell them to do as much research ahead of time as they can. Know local laws and regulations and know your industry and how it might change in the country that you're moving to. Do a whole ton of market research about what your business is going to look like across borders. And try and anticipate changing needs within your research and your business planning. The way that markets react are different in each country. And you're straddling different types of political risk in places like the US and Italy. So I think I did a tremendous amount of research before we started and
Hmm.
never stopped. And I think it's really helped.
Yes, I definitely agree with that one. Just do the research. So let's bring up the economy right now.
Yeah,
How is it affecting everything right now? I mean, I see it as unstable.
for sure. Yeah.
um, so being an expat, living in another country, and the economy is just going bonkers, in my opinion. What would you say to this right now, as far as?
So the tricky thing when you're an expat is you have to balance the outlook for two different economies, right? You've got the economy in your home country where friends, family, assets, bank accounts, things like that are inevitably based. Then you've got your exposure to your new country, same thing. And then you've got maybe your business, which might have more impact from the US or Italy or where it may be. Um, in this moment in time, like I think we're at a really difficult point because a lot of things are changing very quickly. A
Mm-hmm,
lot of people are talking about how AI is transforming the economy, how it's transforming profitability, how work is going to look in the future. And I feel like when you run a small business, you don't see these things happen in real time. The impact of them is muted to you. It certainly isn't transforming our business of almost 10 people. It's not that transformative. But you do see the impact in like jobs numbers in the US. You see the
mm-hmm,
impact in like the forward outlook for corporations who don't think they're going to hire as many people. You see the volatility in the stock market, which is a warning sign
right.
that valuations are probably, a little bit high or they're on tenuous footing. So the way that you deal with that is to control what you can control, right? De-risk where you can, whether it's the exchange rate, whether it's your stock market exposure, whether it's how you bank. I mean, simple things like that, right? Like how do you FX money? How do you exchange money from the US to Europe or vice versa? So focus on what you can control, and that way you reduce some of the volatility. And I feel like as an expat entrepreneur, there's a lot more that you can control that you just don't have time to think about, right?
Mm-hmm,
Whether it's exchange rate, whether it's banking, whether it's exposure to different types of risk.
yeah. Yeah, I look at the world right now just to kind of the AI is affecting me definitely in many
Yeah.
aspects, but I keep changing to go with the time. So hopefully
Oh, yeah.
it'll
It's an
change. But
evolution.
it's gonna happen. It's gonna be here, and we all knew it was gonna happen. It was gonna come as far as the AI aspect, but there's also everything else on top of that. So this year has been definitely up in the works with the economy. And hopefully, I'm hoping, I keep hoping, and I think at some point it has to level out because it just can't keep going in this direction. And I think maybe
Yeah.
2026, that's where we'll start seeing some leveling out with both AI and maybe the economy. But
Yeah.
we'll see. New
Yeah.
year,
Yeah.
new year hopes. So thank you, Alex, for joining me and telling me your story. I think many people will be interested in listening and hearing what you had to say.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
I want to thank everyone for watching. Thank you for being a part of this very special episode. This project was created to highlight the diverse and influential journey of expats building their lives in Italy and their businesses here as well. If you're an expatpreneur and interested in being featured, feel free to reach out, message me, contact me. You can do it even by commenting in below. This series is just the beginning, and there are many more stories to come. So like and follow anywhere you can. We're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. Until next time, here's to bold moves and global dreams.